Somewhere in Colorado right now, there is a town where the last person to leave never locked the door. The store is still stocked. The calendar stopped on a specific date. The street outside has not made a sound in decades. Nobody has ever fully explained why some of these towns ended the way they did, and at least one has an open case that investigators still cannot close. These are the 7 creepiest small towns in Colorado with disturbing true stories. Number 7. St. Elmo. St. Elmo sits at 10,000 feet, and the first thing visitors notice is how intact it looks. The storefronts are still standing, the windows are still in their frames. It looks less like an abandoned town and more like a town that simply paused. The railroad shut down in 1922, and the population that had once reached 2,000 drained away almost entirely. Almost. Annabelle Stark stayed. Her mother Anna had raised her in deliberate isolation, restricting Annabelle and her brother Tony from socializing with the rest of the town, even when it was alive. When the town emptied, that isolation continued. They ran their general store without electricity or plumbing, carrying water from the creek and reading by oil lamp. By 1943, they were the last 2 full-time residents in the valley. They stayed another 15 years. The Stark family did not leave St. Elmo until 1958. That is not a haunting. That is a real family living inside an abandoned town for decades, held there by a sense of belonging to a place that no longer existed. Would you stay in a place like that if it were the only home you had ever known? Number 6. Independence. 16 miles east of Aspen along Independence Pass, a collection of wooden structures sits quietly at 10,800 feet. On a clear summer day, it looks like exactly the kind of place you would stop to photograph. Independence was founded on the 4th of July, 1879, after prospectors struck gold near the Roaring Fork River. By 1882, it had over 40 businesses, 3 post offices, and a population of around 1,500 people. Then, the winter of 1899 arrived. Record snowfall buried every supply route, and food ran out. According to the Aspen Historical Society, residents stripped the siding planks off their own homes and built 75 pairs of skis. Then, they walked out of the mountains together. They were so determined not to let it break them that they turned the evacuation into a ski race. The entry fee was 1 ham sandwich. The buildings that survived are preserved as a registered historic site today. The people made it out. The town did not. The next town never had a ghost story. What it had was 2 dead marshals and a cemetery that fills in the rest. Number 5. Tincup. On a summer afternoon, Tincup is genuinely beautiful. Wildflowers, open meadows, the kind of scenery that ends up on postcards. The town was officially laid out in March 1879 and grew quickly on gold mining and frontier ambition. What it did not have was functioning law. Disputes were resolved with firearms because there was nothing else to resolve them with. In 1882, Marshal Harry Rivers was shot and killed during a gunfight. The man who replaced him, Marshal Andy Jameson, was gunned down in 1883 while enforcing the law. 2 consecutive marshals were killed in the office within a year of each other. The Tincup Cemetery holds a significant number of men who did not die from mining accidents or harsh winters. They died in confrontations with other men. When you remove accountability from a community under extreme economic pressure, this is often what follows. Number 4. Gilman. Gilman is the only town on this list that you cannot enter. It sits on a cliff edge above the Eagle River, and from the highway below, the buildings are clearly visible, still standing, still intact. The town looks occupied from a distance, which makes the fence line and warning signs feel wrong when you notice them. Founded in 1886, Gilman became Colorado's largest producer of zinc and generated around $328 million in mineral production by 1972. In 1984, the EPA ordered the town to be permanently evacuated. Decades of intensive mining had contaminated the groundwater and soil to a degree that made continued habitation a documented health risk. 2 years later, it was designated a federal Superfund site. The town that generated hundreds of millions of dollars left behind a cleanup bill that fell entirely on the public. The people who made those decisions were long gone before anyone had to pay for it. Gilman is still there, you just cannot go in. The next 2 towns shift this list into something that feels less like bad luck and more like a pattern. Number 3 especially. Number 3, Caribou. Today, Caribou is almost nothing. 2 stone ruins, one collapsed wooden cabin, open land in every direction. By 1875, it had a population of around 3,000 people, a church, 3 saloons, a brewery, and its own newspaper. The Caribou silver mine was sold to Dutch investors in 1871 for $3 million and passed through the hands of prominent Colorado figures, including Jerome Chaffee and David Moffett. A fire in 1879 destroyed most of the town. The community rebuilt. Then, silver yields declined, and the silver crash of 1893 arrived. By the 1920s, fewer than 50 people remained. By 1970, it was gone entirely. 3,000 people, a serious investment, and the will to rebuild after a catastrophic fire. And still, it disappeared so completely that almost nothing marks where it stood. What actually holds a community together when everything around it starts to pull apart? Number 2. Deerfield. The land around Deerfield in Weld County is flat, dry, and quiet, in a way that feels less like peace and more like aftermath. Oliver Toussaint Jackson founded Deerfield in 1910 as an agricultural settlement intended entirely for Black Americans. In Colorado in 1910, that required a level of collective determination that most history books have never properly acknowledged. The community built farms, homes, and businesses from scratch, with the intention of building something independent and lasting. At its peak between 1917 and 1921, around 300 people called it home. Then the forces arrived. Commodity prices collapsed after World War I. Returning soldiers had no interest in farm life. Drought deepened through the following decade. By the time the Great Depression arrived, Deerfield had already been hollowing out for years. The Dust Bowl took what remained. The community was dismantled by a sequence of forces it had no power to stop, and it was never rebuilt. Whether this place is remembered the way it deserves is a question the historical record has not yet answered honestly. Number 1 is the only town on this list where people still live, around 140 of them, which is exactly what makes what happened there so difficult to set aside. Number 1. Silver Plume. Silver Plume sits 45 miles west of Denver in a canyon so narrow that the north side of town receives as little as 2.5 hours of direct sunlight each day in winter, and the south side receives none at all for roughly 6 weeks of the year. It is small, quiet, and occupied, and it has a case file that has been open since 1988. On September 7th, 1987, a local man named Tom Young closed his bookshop on the main street, walked into the mountains with his dog, and never came back. 10 months later, hunters found their remains on Sherman Mountain. Both had been shot in the head. Investigators ruled it a suicide, but the questions were never settled. 1 week after Tom Young's remains were identified, a journalist named Keith Reinhardt arrived from suburban Chicago, rented the same bookshop, and began writing a novel about the case. Then, in the summer of 1988, he walked through town telling everyone he passed that he was going to hike Pendleton Mountain, a 12,500-foot peak. He had a documented fear of heights, was leaving at 5 in the afternoon, had no supplies, no equipment, and was wearing tennis shoes. He never came back. Colorado launched one of the largest search and rescue operations in state history. Over 200 volunteers searched for 7 days. A plane involved in the search crashed, killing the pilot. No trace of Keith Reinhardt was found. Inside his apartment, investigators found his unfinished novel. The final paragraphs read like a description of his own disappearance. In 2021, 2 hikers found Reinhardt's wallet on Pendleton Mountain while filming a college documentary. The case remains officially open with the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office. 2 men, the same shop, the same mountains, 1 year apart. 37 years later, nobody has a complete answer. What does a town do with something like that? These 8 towns do not have much in common on the surface. Some collapsed from economic failure. 1 was evacuated for poisoning its own ground. 1 was built with extraordinary intention and taken apart by forces that never gave it a chance. And 1 is still standing, still occupied, still carrying an open case nobody has solved. What connects them is quieter than any ghost story. These were places where real people built real lives, and something took that away. The unsettling part is not what happened inside them, it is how ordinary they look from the outside, and how easy it is to drive through and see nothing at all. How many places like this have you already passed without stopping? If that question stays with you, subscribe and we will keep looking.